Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for a LudoNarraCon panel inside the Game Actor Studio. I'd love to get straight into our panel today because we have a big panel with a lot of fascinating perspectives to hear from. So I'd love to just get us started and intro our panelists. Here we have Carolyn Marshall, the founder of Interior Night and creator of the critically acclaimed As Dusk Falls. And also joining us is one of the stars of As Dusk Falls, Ryan Nolan, who played Jay Holt. Thank you both for being here. We also have Sebastian Renard, the lead writer on A Plague Tale Innocence and the sequel A Plague Tale Requiem. And also joining us is Charlotte McBurney, who stars in both A Plague Tale games as Amicia de Rune. And finally, we are joined by Sam Barlow, director-writer of Immortality, and the star of Immortality, Manon Gage, who played Marissa Marcel. And I am Natalie. I'm the producer at Half Mermaid on Immortality as well. So very nice to be here. Thank you all for agreeing to do this and joining us for this conversation. I'm super excited because I think all three of these games have such an interesting through line of performance being at the heart of sort of the game design and direction. So I'd love to start us off by just getting right into that. I would like to posit this towards the developers to start us off, and maybe Carolyn, you can begin. Why did you choose to create games that are so centered on performance itself?
Short answer would be because characters are brought to life by wonderful actors and performance, and characters are central and essential to story engagement and empathy coming from the audience that engage with the stories. So like we couldn't imagine writing a story devoid of characters.
I love that answer. That's great. Sebastian, do you want to take a
Yes.
stab?
Well, I think the origins of A Plague Tale were just coming from the fact that we wanted to write a game with, heavily story-based. So the question of the performers basically came after this, and it became, of course, obvious, especially when we met Charlotte, Logan, and the rest of the cast, and it suddenly became so obvious that our characters couldn't exist without them. But I think it started from, like Caroline said, from the story, then the characters, and eventually all the performing aspect of it.
And Sam?
Other than just copying Carolyn's answer, I think there is, video games are a visual medium, and there is, from like a practical standpoint, like the level of compression you get through an actor's performance, right? Like Manon will know, there is hundreds of page of script and thousands of page of like backstory and thinking that goes into all this stuff that then ends up in like a few seconds on screen. And the mastery of craft that you get with talented performers is that they can take all of that character work and all of that story and then just kind of squish it into a glance, right? So it's incredibly powerful. And I think to Caroline's point, like certainly like when I jumped from kind of more AAA games into indie, I was looking around and like all the narrative indie games, the question everyone had to solve was, how do we tell a story without characters? Because no one could afford characters, right? So then you're like, well, we're doing, Gone Home, it's an empty house and it's everybody's belongings. But then even with Gone Home, and this was kind of a big point for me in thinking about this, was like, Gone Home didn't work until they added in voice recording of the character reading out things that were originally intended to be text documents. So I think, if you're trying to communicate emotion and create these characters, then obviously performance is critical.
That's great. That actually leads me to my next question, which is about the evolution of your relationship to performance as a developer. Like how has your relationship to performance changed? Like, were you in previously in working on, games or projects that weren't as performance driven, and now it is at the crux of sort of your narratives, or how has that relationship changed? Carolyn, I'd love to throw that to you first.
Great. I guess I've always been working on games that were performance driven. I think the interesting part, like working on Heavy Rain and Beyond, Two Souls, etc. Like it was always some kind of mocap involved or facial mocap involved. I think the interesting part for me was like how it's changed from like depending on your budget as well. Like you use different means, but like how mocap itself evolved from just capturing body movements to the full performance with all the constraints that come with it. And still for me, the frustration was that, even with really high-end 3D characters, you're still very far off what live actors can give you. So with As Dusk Falls, like we went straight to like, let's not do mocap, let's not use 3D characters, let's try and use live action performances and inject it back into the game. And because also we needed that flexibility of rewrites and iterations, because as soon as you go to performance capture, everything is baked. Like it's really difficult to go back and change things, which often happens in game development. So we went with this like mix of 2D characters with like hand-drawn feel and 3D backdrops, so that we could really get like the thing we really wanted to avoid was the uncanny valley. So we thought, let's not try and skip through it with 3D. We thought let's go straight to 2D and use live action performances in a stylized way, but still using it. And I thought that liberated the writing a lot, because then we could really rely on subtle facial cues or subtle emotions. Like you take one frame of Jay Holt in the game, it tells you so much. Whereas sometimes you've got really high-end AAA games, and if you just get a screenshot, you're not sure what they're feeling on screen. So we skipped through that hurdle like this, like just like going around it. But that
it was
was
interesting
kind of stuff.
to play that game as well from the kind of gaming perspective. Was it almost reintroduced like something that I always think about in games, is that like the player's imagination is primary, right? And some of the older games people have very fond memories of because so much of it was in their imaginations. And there was something really interesting in As Dusk Falls where it felt almost novelistic in the way time unfolded, because you had this ability with the freeze frames to kind of step around, whereas oftentimes in like a real-time game there's this curious weird time zone you're in where everything's in real time, but you also need to wait for the player to do things. And that creates like a real tension, whereas in your game that slight abstraction away from it was really interesting, because you got the performance and you got the voice and you got the looks, but then you had the bit where I was taking control. Like I was able to kind of fit into that more kind of conveniently.
Yeah, I think you said it as well, is that once you go into like this freeze frame kind of performance, like every frame you select has to be like really spot on emotionally, and then the voice takes over a lot of like the work, like to filling the gaps between the frames. So it was like it puts the player in an interesting mindset, like filling the gaps themselves, was supported by the voice.
I love what you said in terms of avoiding the uncanny valley, because it's such a risk that I think, because we're in this sort of not all the way, hyper realistic, high fidelity, face mocap, that we are always kind of butting up against the limitations of where technology is, that can lead us down this odd uncanny valley route. And I think all three of these games do such an incredible job of capturing the rawness of performance and that rawness of live action, the nuances of sort of facial expression and those kinds of things. So I think that's such a testament to the way that performance is treated in all three of these games, that none of them feel like we're in this kind of bizarro upside down world that we run the risk of doing. I'd love to pose the same question to Sebastian in terms of the evolution of performance and how, especially from the writing perspective, how that your relationship to performance may have changed from some of your earlier projects to A Plague Tale.
Sure. Well, I started in 2005. Back in the days, we didn't use motion capture, so everything was keyframe. So I remember the main rule was always keep it short, keep it short, keep it short, all the time. And I remember, working and reworking on my dialogues with the lead cinematic, which in a way helped me get better because it forced me to go straight to the point and avoid, I was still a beginner back then. So I think it was sort of a good lesson for me in terms of writing, and it taught me that I could go faster and use other means to get where I wanted. Then, of course, time passed, and based on the project, so I did indie projects, I did bigger projects too. I wasn't always close to the recordings and the motion capture, so it really varied from a project to another. Most of the time, I was there for the voice recording, not necessarily the motion capture. But when I arrived at Asobo, the funny thing is that technology evolved a lot in the meantime, and so we were able to do motion capture, and there were new demands in terms of writing. So I remember working on dialogues with the creative director, and he was like, I had kept this habit of making things shorter, but it's at this point, because of the story, because it had become more complex, it didn't really help character development and everything. So I had to sort of adapt to that and find new ease. I would say take more space in a better way to help the scenes develop. It took a little bit, but I mean, it was so practical and so good, and such a liberation for me that I think I got used to it pretty fast. And of course, from Innocence, where we didn't have our own motion capture studio yet, so we were using the suits with the integrated captures. So it was a bit complicated, to be honest. We didn't have the tech was a bit limited, but then when we moved to Requiem, because of the COVID situation, etc., that basically made working with English actors more complicated, or record outside of the country, we had to build our own studio. And from this point, it was a real comfort for us. And so basically on the Plague Tale, I was there all the time during the motion capture sessions, during the voice recording, and and of course from Innocence to Requiem, because I had worked with Charlotte and Logan already. I knew what they were able to do, and I mean, it was such a luxury, because I was like, okay, now I know where she can go, and we're going to go straight for this, have a more badass Amicia, bring more intensity, because she was able to do it, and I think she really enjoyed it, and so that's the way things evolve for me.
That's great. I'd love to detour quickly because I think on this note of the evolution of A Plague Tale Innocence to Requiem, I'd love to ask a question to Charlotte. The first time you played Amicia, you were 16. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is correct.
So I'd love to know how has it been to grow with this character over the course of 2 games? Sebastian's saying that from your performance in Innocence, he's gleaning and shaping what Amicia sort of ends up like in Requiem. From your perspective, what was that experience like?
Yeah, I definitely had an experience. I remember Manon and I were talking around the time of the BAFTAs. We were talking about drawing on yourself, connecting yourself to a part of a character, and how some characters you're like, oh yeah, that's really easy, it's an easy move to do, others are more difficult. I felt in Innocence, I definitely connected with Amicia, but in Requiem I was like, oh, this is going to be great. I've felt all of these things, and it felt it was a very, very different experience, because in Innocence there was a lot more I was incredibly inexperienced. I was very nervous, which did connect with Amicia, who was also inexperienced and nervous, but she her whole relationship with Hugo, which is really the crux of the whole game, is, in the first game there is all of this distance and there is all of this coldness, and for me I found that really hard to play. I think I was always going in with too much warmth, because Logan, who plays Hugo, is amazing and adorable and fabulous, and I was just wanted to be lovely to him, and I think I found that really difficult. And then in Requiem they've got this incredibly close bond, and I was like, this is everything. So I think there was this feeling of an enjoyment of playing someone who's a little bit different to you, and then in Requiem that just thrill of getting to play someone where you're rubbing shoulders with them.
Oh, I love that. That's great. To guide us back to the sort of evolution question, I'd love to pose it to Sam. You've obviously had like a very stark difference in the different types of performance that you've worked with throughout your career. So from your perspective, how do you figure this evolution between sort of where you started out to Immortality?
And I think the forward motion has always been, regardless of the technology, like how do we carve out the space to respect the performance so that can be the most authentic, awesome version of it, right? So, I mean, the first game technically I released was a text game, so that was before we even had like visual representations of stuff. And then I just went through like voice acting, then doing voice directing, to then motion capture, to like early motion capture, where we would have stunt performers would do the body motions whilst we played over speakers a voice recording that we had done in we would essentially make a radio play of each scene, and then the stunt performers would kind of mime to it, to then getting into like full performance capture. And I think that was like the last couple of 3D games I did, when we hit that level of performance capture where you could essentially just stick the actor in a space, and obviously you have the pretense of this is not a large black soundstage, this is wherever you're supposed to be. But that to me was then when it started to feel really good, when you could just have the actors be present, and even then the cool thing about mocap versus traditional film was you were generally shooting scenes in a whole take. So you would block out the whole scene and then you'd just do the whole scene, which for the actors was really exciting, because they were like, oh, this is like, I have the presence of being in theater, but you have the subtlety of knowing the camera is going to be right here. So then when I accidentally jumped over into live action, which was partly an accident and partly a choice, like I was saying, of if I want to go and make an indie game and I don't have $5 million to spend on a motion capture sequence, like how am I going to still tap into that? But then when I got to live action, I guess probably in some ways intentionally, like most of the live action stuff I've done has been these longer, more immersive takes. Like they are not traditional cinematic sequences, right? So generally the actors are getting to show up and be present for 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. So yeah, for me it's, and the struggle is always financial and practical of, oh, I would love to spend the time rehearsing this. I'd love to give the actors a whole day to get their heads around this scene, but we have to hit certain targets and stuff. So I think that's, for me, it's less about the technology and more about how important is the performance, right? And that has definitely been, I mean, you see it now, we're handing out awards for performance, right? BAFTA now has 2 awards. 10 years ago, if I'd said it's really important that we have an extensive cut, like we used to show up and you didn't have castings for roles. You would just show up and the people that were running the voice recording studio would just have actors that they would bring in and be like, oh, this is the actor that's going to play such and such a role. right? And then you'd start doing casting, but then you'd be casting just off people's reels, and then So I think for me, the real progression has been going, no, actually, the actor is bringing so much to the screen. Like, how do we carve out the space to allow them to do their work?
That actually really neatly ties into a question I wanted to pose to Ryan. Sam, you were talking about sort of different types of mo-capture performance, different types of, like stunt performers versus, voice performers. And Ryan, you in your bio describe playing the body of Jay Holt, which I always thought was a very funny way to describe it, but I really love it. What does that mean to you, and how did that influence how you approached the performing Jay Holt in terms of this very embodied mindset towards this character?
To be honest, I don't think it changed how I approached the character one bit. Mm-hmm. It would have been like an absolute disservice if I sort of didn't turn up and didn't attempt to do like an American accent, because this world had been created where everybody else was doing an American accent. If I came in and just was like, no, I'll do my own, it would have just it'd have been a disservice to like Caroline's vision, like what everybody was doing, and like I was all in. Do you know what I mean? We were in Arizona, like we were creating that world. So I didn't really approach it any differently. It wasn't ever. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. How did you sort of going into filming, going into pre-production, how did you prepare for the character Jay Holt? How did you, like, was there any type of specific prep that, like, you felt heavily influenced your role in terms of maybe references or just your conceptions of the character himself?
Yeah, probably piggybacking off what Charlotte said earlier. It was just finding things that you had in common. It was like, I read something interesting in an article around about the time that the game was being released, that something about like the casting of the characters. Like it isn't lost on me that two of the brothers, two of the actors are from the northeast of England. Like that is like a working class region of England, and it's the class story of like, blue collar Arizona. It was like, okay, cool. Like we had that political understanding. It's not necessarily political, but that really helped. It was like, I know it's like the disconnect, or whether that's, so it's little stuff like that, and it's going, essentially he's just a dreamer. He's a dreamer who wants to do right by his family and wants to do right in himself. So it was like, yeah, I'll have a bit of that. And then in terms of like reference, I was like, well, who do I know from Arizona? And I was like, well, my favorite band when I was 15 was Linkin Park. So I was like, Chester Bennington, Phoenix, Arizona. So I was like, have a bit of that.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Physicality,
that's so like, great.
Yeah, just I'd love to say it was really, really deep and loads of pages of work, but it's just trial and error.
No, but I mean, I think that's such a crucial part, like iteration, just being able to get ideas out there, feel things out, try things on, take things off, is such an important part of that early figuring. I mean, even from the developer's perspective, obviously iteration is like, the goal and the dream to be in iteration as long as you can and hold on to kind of the experimental phase. So I love that also translates to sort of the performer's, perspective and process, that, there are certain things you try on and you take off, and some things stick. And I love the Linkin Park reference, also one of my favorites.
We had the benefit of having rehearsals before we did the shoot as well, and right at the start of the process, like both Caroline and our directors like gave us permission to like be collaborative. Like everything was on paper, but it wasn't. That's who it was. We were given the permission to try things out, which was great, which was a luxury that you don't get across different platforms. So that was really cool.
Yeah.
So thanks, Caroline.
What was I was intrigued. What was the process like to actually shoot? Because I think your guys' project is probably the closest to what people might have in their heads of like the challenges of a video game story and just how much branching there is. Right, you can get to the end of the game and have whole different versions. So I'm guessing it's very modular. But like, what does a given day look like in terms of tackling that kind of structure?
Mental.
But like what we did was that because of the style, initially we weren't sure how to shoot it actually. So we started approaching it like a photo shoot, and then we quickly realized that's not the best way. That's not the best way to get the best performance because actors are not models. So like, what's the point to ask them to come and pose? So we moved to, okay, we're gonna play the shortest linear sections that the game gave us, and then go down a branch, and then go down the branch that's the most different. And because of the style, the visual style, sometimes we didn't have to do the middle branches because we would reuse the visual performance, but record the audio performance. But the thing we realized also initially that we shot the audio first in the very early prototypes, and then recorded the visual performance, and then we realized, well, it's actually better the other way around. So Ryan's performance is really the guide, the through line for Jay. Like the voice actor is different. This is an American actor, so that it was for accent reasons. To be clear. Sorry, Ryan. I know you've made progress.
That's all right.
But like Ryan was really like, every time we were going into voice recording sessions, like I had his face in mind and I remembered exactly like, the scenes and stuff. So it was really like the guide and the blueprint for the entire performance.
That was the thing that always, when we did it this way, where you would have the radio play and then you'd take it to the stage, it was always so messed up because the voice recording, you would have like a 4-hour session and you record everything. Right, and people were very good at that because they were coming from redubbing entire anime shows in a week or whatever. But then you'd end up on the stage where you have the freedom to actually just block things out and walk through it. And at that point, we were already stuck with like, well, this is exactly the pacing and emotional tenor of the scene. Yeah, that's cool that you attacked the branches in a sensible way. I remember I did a thing that was branching and. I think it was our AD was obsessed with, well, we need the entire tree on a wall. So they had like a wall of the stage. They printed out the entire tree, and no one ever, like, all it did was scare people because they would look at it and be like it would paralyze them.
I remember getting sent through all the scripts and just looking at it and going, got to learn all that, have I?
Really? Are you sure?
So that was interesting with a highlighter and then writing things out in a notepad. And then I think as I got to know the story better, I was like, I'm going to put this away and trust instinct and stuff.
From the point of view of like branching, and obviously also in Immortality, there are sections that some people will never uncover, those who are not determined enough. And, I wonder, as a point of view as an actor and probably also as a developer, is there a frustration with particular moments that you're very attached to, performance moments that you're really proud of, that you're like, no, go that way. Trust me, you want to see that. Do you have any kind of particular attachments to certain sections, or did you just have to relinquish control and go, people are going to do what they're going to do?
Yes,
I love
this
that
is where I
question.
use a test. Yeah, it's really like what you want is balance. Like you don't want to create an entire super cool branch and no one goes down this route. But it's really up to the narrative design to be balanced and allow for enough different point of views so that players are really convinced they should go down this route, and other players will be like, no other way. That has to be the B choice. And so this is where we use a test like all the time, just to make sure people trickle down all the branches in different.
So psychological.
Yeah, there's a bit of that.
Mind games.
I had to mourn some scenes that we filmed that didn't make it in, which I'll not talk about because it's not fair. But obviously there was things when I got told, I was like, what? what? But then it gets explained to you on a story level and a character level, and you go, okay,
Yeah.
fair enough.
Yeah.
I feel like we were very spoiled that we didn't have to say goodbye to any of our scenes. Because, I mean, coming from the sort of indie film perspective, some of our film crew would be like, well, you know, we just might not get this scene. And Sam and I would be like, no, we got to get the scene. Like, it cannot not happen.
We just spent 16 months iterating this structure so that everything makes sense and that you can't, Because, I mean, we were filming in the midst of COVID. And the indie movie vibe is, oh crap, we just lost our location for tomorrow. Maybe we don't need this scene in a bar, or or we'll just change it, or we'll take the exposition from that scene and we'll put it in the other scene we're shooting on Friday. And everyone in an indie film is like, and it'll all get fixed in the edit. Like, don't worry.
Yeah.
Like, you'll just end up with stuff, and then you'll figure it out later. And we're like, we can't edit it. Like, this is 300 one-take scenes, carefully balanced. Like, we just have to shoot everything, and we're shooting all the words in the script in all these scenes. Like, but it's, I mean, on the subject of like the luxury of having stuff that the audience is going to see. And I remember actually in a conversation with Sony, Caroline, when Heavy Rain was out, and the producers there, because we were pitching them something that was in the same world, and we were doing Silent Hill. And they were like, it's maddening that you shoot all this stuff and then the audience doesn't know it's there. They're like, we're spending all this money on performance. And so they were obsessed with, and you have it a little bit, right, in As Dusk Falls, of the thing of at least telling them, like, oh, but there is some other stuff, right? You could go back and you've missed this stuff. I'm always like, there was interesting, I think it was the Cyberpunk developers did a talk at GDC. They were talking about level design, and they realized they had screwed up because they have all these branching routes through levels. And because they were worried about people not getting the story, they put all the interesting story beats in the kind of the most basic, simple flow through the level. And it meant that people didn't really care about doing cleverer things or taking different paths because it was clear that this was where all the cool shit happened. And they then realized subsequently, like, oh, well, we should be putting the cool stuff down the specific paths because we're rewarding people for doing something specific. And so that's always, for me, is like, yes, if only 20% of people see this thing, it's not, you're not worried about the 80%. You're going, well, the 20% just got something cool. And there's that sense you get as a player of like, oh, I did such a weird sequence of things to get to this cool shit that's exciting. Like, I feel like I've discovered or earned something. Although I do remember when Natalie first joined, maybe it was for LudoNarraCon, we did like a talk about telling lies. And there was like a sequence in Telling Lies where we filmed an open air festival live performance, and Alex Shipp did this one take performance of this Iggy Pop song, and it took so much effort and expense to pull off, and it was so cool. And I mentioned it, and Natalie and Jeff, our producer at the time, were like, we never saw that scene. And I was like, God damn it, like...
There was a performance in Telling Lies. I had no idea. I totally missed
I had not seen this scene either. I have now I gotta go back. This is the first I'm hearing of it.
Yeah,
it was so great. Alex flew in, and originally it was on our first day of filming for her, and we were like, we can't do this to her. But it ended up being like a second or third day, and she just showed up in this field with this kind of makeshift stage and just got on stage and started doing Iggy Pop. It was so cool.
Wow.
That's great. Manel, I was wondering if you had, I mean, when Ryan was talking about getting, the giant script, I was thinking of you, the giant script that we sent you to about 2 years ago now. How on the sort of scenes that people might never see, obviously as the lead in Immortality, you have the most highly likelihood of being seen and people catching most of your scenes, but I'm curious and it kind of relates to, I think, my question I had for you, which is has your experience of the character of Mercer Marcel changed from being in the film shoot, being in that kind of contained world, versus seeing her in the game played by other people and yourself? Obviously you've played through Immortality on your Twitch stream, so I'm curious, both kind of questions, like I think they're sort of related, but how how has your experience of Marissa Marcel shifted from the different ways in which and I think that can kind of go for all the actors versus, seeing it in game and being on the stage, being in the studio.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think it's funny because you get a script that's 400 pages long, and part of you is like, oh my God. But then part of you is like, oh my God, there's so much depth to this and complexity. And like, this is a character that has been, meticulously thought out and invented, over the course of years. And like, it's like, what a gift to get to have that. It's just like, because you're oftentimes when you're auditioning for film and TV, you're getting things that are, things get written quite quickly, and you're lucky if your character is, is two-dimensional. And so to have something that feels like, wow, this is like, there's like a whole saga here of who this person is. Like, I think I went into it with the sort of like nerdy excitement of like, there's so much here, and like, how can I put, like, to what Sam was saying earlier, like everything I can that's in this script into. You can't do it into every single scene, but like, how can I infuse, you can't play like the 400 pages in 1 second of, in one scene. But it was so exciting to get to know this character through the script. And then, we had rehearsals as well, which was so crucial. And I think shooting chronologically was a big deal also, in like actually living through Marissa's arc and life. I think if we had shot out of order, I would have had a very different experience. It wouldn't have been as fun, and it would have been like just crazy. I don't know, like there was something to like the evolution of it that felt so special, and being with the character for that long and like every single day, knowing every scene was gonna make it to the, you can't there's no, for me it's like, you can't, there's no like, oh, they'll cut to the wide if I can't hit this emotional beat or whatever. It's like, no, you have to be 100% at every scene. And there's no time to warm up.
How long was your shoot?
3 months?
It was
50 days?
Yeah, it was just under 50 days.
Okay, I don't know why I think it was...
Was that broken up, or was that all in one?
Well,
we had pre-production.
The pre-production was like a month before, and we were, in the giant studio warehouse for most of that. So it felt like summer camp started... We've often described it as summer camp because it like took place over the summer, and it was very much like each movie we're coming in, we'd have like a new set of campers that would join us for our little Immortality summer camp. But it was basically 3 months that we spent together from sort of the pre-production to the end.
It feels like so much, it feels like longer than that, but then I guess also for me it's like, all the pre-production, like for me, just getting the script, learning the script, highlighting, and like I had to buy new color highlighters. I had to look for like, baby blue highlighters and like deep purple there's like not enough highlighters to highlight every iteration of the character. Like
that was actually an important part of the casting process, is when you're video calling, talking to potential people, if they're color coding or in any way annotating the script, then you're like, okay, you didn't do that, this wouldn't be happening.
Wow, that's really
Michelle
good to
Yeoh
know.
showed off her script for
I
Everyone
saw
at Once,
that.
and it was all the different timelines, and I was like, yes, that's my kind of actor.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you have to. It's just, as I said, like so exciting and such a gift to get to do that. Like, why wouldn't you do that? First of all, like I couldn't play Marissa Marcel without putting that much effort into it, because what am I going to do? Like show up and sound like myself in every version of her life? And,
My
like, do the
anxiety
same shit?
wouldn't
It's like,
let me rock up to a set not knowing my lines.
No,
it just
have
wouldn't.
to.
It wouldn't
That's-
work.
But actors do that all the time. Like, it's amazing. Just in my experience, like how low the bar is. Like, it's like, wow, you're showing up, and I mean, to be fair, by two of everything, there were some scenes where I was learning them at the last minute in hair and makeup, but I had also like done the work previously. But I also didn't want to ignore the second part of your question, Natalie, which is like, how has my perception of Marissa Marcel changed, or like how she's perceived by the audience? I think watching people discover this story on Twitch and then watching friends play it, what's amazing is like everyone does have a different experience because everyone watches it in a different order, and that also informs character, because if you meet a character when they're at the height of their confidence and fame and whatever, it's a very different relationship that you develop to the character than like, oh, this is like a young kind of vulnerable like ingenue, or like this is some like dissociated like like jaded star at the end of her, like, it's just a different experience. And it's, what's been funny, I mean, I'm sure Ryan and Charlotte, you have this too, but I'm so attached to my character. I love her so much, and I've had friends be like, oh, I don't really like Marissa, like she kind of peeves me out, and I'm like, why? Can you tell me why?
So defensive.
And then they'll say something and I'll be like, okay, well, did you know that she was going through a
Do you know what happened? Because it was baby blue, which means she was struggling. So
Yeah,
you need to know that. I feel like I'm interested in all of, like, I remember when we were talking, Manon, you were saying, you were asked about how you felt about watching yourself on screen, and you were like, oh, I just don't attach to it, and it's almost as though it's not me. And I really enjoyed hearing someone voice that, because I've only ever done the voice side of things, and people go, oh, is it weird to hear the sound of your voice? I hate the sound of my own voice. And it's like, you really have to get over it after a certain point, because you're hearing these takes again and again. And I wonder with Ryan, because obviously the likeness is, although stylized, it's definitely you, It's 100% you. And I feel like that attachment to the character that you're saying that you've got a, Manon, with Marissa, you've got that close attachment to her emotionally, but maybe not visually. And I don't know, and I'm wondering how Ryan feels about that as well, with his connection to Jay. And
I feel similarly. Like, I can watch it and go, yeah, that's Jay, that's not me. And also time, the length of like how long it takes to make a game, like I've got to move on. Like, Jay is like in there, but then when you've worked on it for so long, and then it's maybe a year and a half after wrap, that maybe it starts to come out. I'm like, oh, cool, there it is. There's the thing that we worked really hard on for so long. So
3 years of on and on of shoot. 3 years of shoot,
I
right?
asked about how long the shoot was, because ours was broken up for multiple reasons, not just COVID. So
3 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then another year and a half.
I think I first auditioned like May 2018, and it came out July 2022.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
Yeah.
At least you knew who you were, though. I remember speaking to some of the actors on, I think it was Red Dead Redemption, and because it's like Rockstar and it's so secretive, they didn't know what game they were working on. And they would come together every couple of months to shoot stuff, and they start piecing it together. They're like, well, we're all cowboys, so this is probably Red Dead Redemption, right? And like, it's so bizarre. But they were just showing up and being very. I think like one of the leads from one of the Grand Theft Auto games had the same experience, where he only realized like a ways in, oh, I think I'm the star of the next Grand Theft Auto game. It's so weird.
Amazing.
Crazy.
You know what's
so
really
weird.
interesting about that is just getting now a lot more gaming and like voice auditions. It's stunning the amount of auditions you'll get where you're not even given proper sides. Like, you're not given a scene, you're just given like, here are 4 lines and or like, a little paragraph and then a couple more lines, and with indicate, there's a general description of the character, and then there's like, this line is spoken in sort of an angry, pained way, and this line is spoken sort of like in a pensive way, and you're just like, that's not how acting works, human behavior works. Like, I don't know what you're asking, like, what are you expecting here? And then I think that's why it's amazing when thought is actually put into the script and the casting and the performance, which is just like clearly just not the case in every game, although I think everybody's understanding that like that's the direction to go in, but where it's not being treated as an afterthought. Like, lines aren't like, or the term I've just learned is spojected. Please speak this line spojected, as in spoken but kind of projected because you're in combat. I'm like, what? What is that? What are you talking about? So anyway, I'm just curious. Yeah, Charlotte and Ryan, like, what? I mean, well, not Ryan, because Ryan is the body of J-Hole, but Charlotte, like, what was your experience? I know you've talked about, like, being in the booth and all that, but just, yeah, like, how would you prepare for a scene, or, like, you know, going into something, sometimes not being with Hugo and all that?
Oh, I was always alone. I was alone
Yeah.
for whatever it was, 120 hours or something. And it was...
Wow.
Ooh.
No, 150. I don't know. Whatever.
Wow.
And it was it was, well, I had Seb on audio, but it was we were by ourselves, and I would get the script, but it was often quite broken up, and it's like on an Excel spreadsheet, and because it's not visual, I don't need visuals because I'm not performing visually. I wouldn't get a lot of information, so sometimes I'd be reading her line and I'd be like, what is she talking about? I have no... and you'd have to wait until you got into the booth and they'd show me the visuals. So it was very much you guys talking about your highlighters. I had no highlighters.
Oh,
I was like
right.
I was coming in and just, I'd often see lines for the first time in the booth, and it's great because I didn't have to learn any lines. I did not have to learn 400 pages of script, but it's a much fresher, and what was great about Requiem is that the visuals were at such a late stage. They were pretty much done, so they were showing me the entirety of this world, and I just had to slot in, which was a lot of fun, because it was just like, oh, I know where she is, I know where she's meant to be, but also there is still that level of flexibility. But it's hard, and I think with auditions, what was really nice is by the time with Requiem, I trust Asobo and I trust everyone who I recorded with, so I knew that we'd get there, and I also was confident enough, because it was the second game, to kind of put my hand up and go, I have a question, can we talk about this? I'm still not confident, which is important, and I didn't know on the first game. I was always just like, yeah, that's clear, and I'd be standing there going, I don't know.
Yeah, it's very frustrating actually not to be able to rehearse things, but based on, you know, schedules and stuff. Basically, when we record, we're still writing the other levels. So, yeah, you have to trust, of course, the actor, but also the voice director. And in our case, Mark and Jay were incredible. Mark had directed the voices on the Innocence, but we couldn't have him for the whole production. So it was sort of, you know, because I, as a writer, also need to be reassured, and I was like, oh my god, how are we going to do that? But Jay did an amazing job learning the story, all the stakes and everything.
Yeah.
So he was the main guy, basically onboarding Charlotte every time. I was there as a support with my other writer to provide all the context, psychological, but. Each time we were able to show pictures, we were sharing videos of the levels, you know, based on how they had evolved. Because I know that nothing replaces this. You know, actors have an amazing capacity of projection, but when you show something, you know, it tells like it's worth 1,000 words. So we had to move forward like that. And Charlotte has a very special ability. She's able to remember like everything she's done before, and she was also turned into a producer sometimes, like even helping the voice director and the engineer find their way inside the Excel documents. Like, I think we did this line and we were there, so it means that now we're here, and we were like, what the hell, what's going on?
It's a polite way of saying I was becoming really annoying. I was like, no, let's move on. This section.
It's something that
But
when I was doing some of that voice stuff early on, like the role of the voice director is so key to all this, because it's a very specific type of direction. Because often you are coming in a bit colder and fresher, and there's a whole visual world that you're not seeing. So seeing the voice director guide the performer is always always very impressive.
It's your one bit of continuity, and I feel like, Manon, you talking about projection? Is that it? Projection?
Spojection.
Spojection. There we go.
I don't know. I'm learning about it.
There are these moments where, especially when I would have companion characters and that kind of thing, where when we were talking about levels and, you know, your volume, and it's like, oh, your companion character might be here, or the player might have wandered off to the other end of the room away from the companion character, and so it's like, can you find a volume that would cover this, but also the stretch of a large room? And you're like, what volume is that? I don't. On Innocence, when I hadn't played any games, and the visuals weren't at such a level, and I was being described to, especially puzzles, because I'd never played puzzles before. So someone being like, oh, so you might be here, you might be there, you need a prompter line, talking about chains and boxes and crates, and I was like, I don't understand. And then I watched the game and I was like, oh, this makes so much more sense. So I appreciated the visuals in the second one. I mean, and I guess that experience of did you guys feel that shift when you went from script to being on set and being around other people and that lift? Maybe no.
I love that question. I just wanted to say that, like, the thing that just struck me is, like, it sounds so much to me, what you're describing, in some ways like immersive theater for the performer, to be both guiding the audience member, you know, if people have to participate or stand up or whatever it is. But then also being in character, but I get, you know, obviously with the difference being that you're isolated, but I love that you were able to be immersed in the world, because I think that, yeah, like that's a game changer. Like if you're alone in a room with nothing but your imagination, like I feel like actors can do it, but it's so you know, to be in it, like I'm so glad you had that. Sorry, what was your question? I just
just that lift of going from, I guess, your imagination when you were alone with your script to being in person on the set. It's working with other actors. Sounds nice.
I loved how many scenes that I had with other actors, because it's just that exchange of energy, like receiving it back was really nice, because I would love to say I have an amazing imagination. And I do, but when you're on, I have no idea what things look like. I might have an idea of what I've been shown, but just being able to play the truth of the scene, and then taking the notes accordingly was really helpful. The scenes when you're just on your own, and you're being told to like cheat lifting a box and stuff, and you're going, cool, I'm trusting you 100%, because I don't know, but it's fun. I love the fact that you can't say everything. It's great.
Well, I think we are getting near the end of our time, which I'm so sad, so short, and so many fascinating things to be said. But I had one final kind of fun question that I wanted to pose to everyone in this call, which is there a type of scene that you haven't yet produced, developed, or performed that you are really keen to tackle? And I'll start with Ryan, because you're my box neighbor here.
Okay. I often don't play characters with positive endings, so I would like
a happy ending.
Well, I was going to say that, and then I changed away from it. So I would like positive endings for characters that I play.
Yeah, positive. Yeah. That's a good answer. I love that.
I would.
You were pretty
my
happy
ending
in
for
my
Jay
playthrough.
was very positive.
It was. I mean, a lot of bad stuff had happened on the way, I guess. Yeah.
You know what you get when
good.
you make other choices.
Yeah, I felt like Jay ended up okay in my playthrough, but maybe there's probably a lot of other options.
Cumulative. Wait.
Don't tell me.
There's some pretty grim ones, yes.
Thanks, Caroline.
Mano, you're my next buddy.
Oh my god. I think in terms of games, like I want to do mocap and voice acting. Like I think that would be so much fun. I'd love to, wield a sword or something and try to spoject, or hopefully
nail
work.
it.
Hopefully work. Thank you. With a studio that had the studios represented here a more just like a beautiful script, so that I wouldn't be told to spoject. I could do the wonderful stuff that the people in this room did. So yeah,
love that. Charlotte?
I feel very inspired by Sam talking about mocap, with that thing that it's got everything of theatre and then the best parts of film combined, that makes me all tingly and I want to do it like right now. But I guess in terms of a character or something, it'd be fun to go and do someone really awful. Just just really awful.
That's great. Sebastian?
Definitely a comedy.
I love the range of answers here. This is great.
I've killed so many characters. I've put them through so many ordeals that, finding place, for comedy, room for comedy in a playtale was a bit difficult. Still, we did it, and I really love that. No, I love it.
Yeah.
I want to say I'm not such a bad guy. Okay, I love comedy. I love humor. No, I love absurd humor, especially. So maybe one day, but each time I have the occasion to do it, I try to do it. In Playtale, Hugo was the good occasion to do it because of his age. So he was sometimes, losing it and doing pretty crazy stuff. But yeah, I think that's something I still love.
I do think that was the number one question when we would come in to record a scene and it would be so awful and we would all just go, Seb, are you okay? Is everything okay?
It's good to
I think applies to all of the games here, honestly.
It turned into a joke, actually. Yeah. Like you imagine everything's going to go well. Sorry.
Caroline?
I think I would love to create like an entire sequence of gameplay with no dialogue.
Wow.
Just like visual cues, something really intense, if someone escaping or something like that. Like, got this fantasy.
I originally pitched Telling Lies as having no dialogue for like 5 minutes. For literally 5 minutes, and then I was like, hang on a minute, this is not going to work.
For a political thriller, that would be quite the
A
challenge.
silent film.
Caroline, I do wonders with no dialogue, so,
Yeah, I was just thinking, you need a body? I know a guy.
I'm your guy.
Let Ryan speak.
Or
Somebody.
quite simply, like a Geordie video game of just that'd be
Yes.
fantastic. I mean,
Yes.
that'll have an audience in the northeast of England.
I play that. in a heartbeat. Sam, any scenes you're keen to tackle?
Well, I guess coming out of mocap, the chip on my shoulder was that the hardest, most expensive thing to do in mocap is see a character take off their clothes or play with their hair. But I feel like I've got that out of my system now. But I don't know. There's still, my thing is just like the range of characters and stories traditionally that have been told in video games is extremely narrow, right? It's very inhibited by the genres and gameplay that we're used to seeing. So I guess continuing to push into interesting and different directions there will keep driving me.
I love that. I think that's
What about
a shared goal, everyone here.
What about you, Natalie? Do you have any?
Yes, Natalie.
Wow.
Yes, Natalie.
I am kind of in love with the idea of doing a Western, so I'd love to do like a moody horseback ride. I don't even know what it would
Horses,
be.
come
We can
on.
all ride.
Yeah.
You've already learned that working with animals
I can
is
play
not
a
a good
horse.
idea.
I've
Having
learned
a whole
nothing
scene
from
be
Nope.
dependent on a horse.
For what it's worth, I did pitch Immortality 2 with 3 movies, one of which was a Western. I was like Western space opera, and I forget what the third one was. Maybe noir or
Western
something.
space opera.
I'm down for all of this. I think I could see
I mean,
Marissa in
Sam, the ball is in your court, Sam.
I've already told you on this one that there are several John Durek movies that no one has ever seen, but unfortunately Marissa Marcel is not in any of them. So you're talking yourself out of.
I do think there's a Geordie actor in one of them, though. I'm pretty sure.
Correct.
Somewhere.
Well, it's like when Get Carter blew up in the 70s, they got into the whole Northern England thing.
Yeah.
That's part of it.
There you go. There you go.
Love that.
Well, unfortunately, our time has come to a close. Thank you, everyone, for being on this panel with us. thank you to fellow traveler and LudoNarraCon for enabling this to happen. This was such a joy. That's what amazingly. Thank you for all of the incredible answers, and I just think this is such a special cohort of actors and developers that are really pushing the boundaries of performance and narrative and what can we expect in terms of immersion and just character-driven storytelling. So thank you all. You are all pioneers of your craft, and just am very glad to
I think the
share this
important
time
thing
with
to
you all.
note here is that all of these games are available right now to purchase.
Thank you,
So
Sam.
click off from this video,
Yep.
go buy all the Plague Tale games, get As Dusk Falls,
All of
get
them.
Immortality, just have some fun, carve out a weekend or two.
Nice.
You've
You
got
feel
time.
sad. and happy.
It'll be a weird weekend.
Yeah, that's
Why?
a weird triple feature right there. That's
I'm into it.
Oh.
Well, thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of LudoNarraCon. Go play I almost said As Dusk Falls, Immortality Tales. Play our
I'd play
game.
it.
That's the one.
I'd play it.
And thank you.
Thanks for having us.
So that's
Thank you.
Thank you so
Bye.
much.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.